It is the dark, early hours of the 31st of August, 1888, in a narrow, gas-lit street in London's East End called Bucks Row. Two carmen on their way to work step into a gateway and find what looks for a moment like a discarded sheet on the ground. It is a woman. Her throat has been cut so deeply that, as investigators will later determine, death came almost instantly, and there are wounds to her abdomen as well. Her name is Mary Ann Nichols, known to friends as Polly. History will remember her as the first of what becomes known as the canonical five. 5 murders that investigators and historians alike agree were the work of one man. Local police treat her death, at first, as another brutal killing in an already dangerous slum district. They have no way of knowing they are looking at the beginning of a case that will eventually fill an official police file with 11 names, terrify an empire, expose a hidden world of poverty most of Britain had chosen not to see, and end without a single arrest. Within the next 10 weeks, more women will die in almost the same way, within walking distance of one another. The killer will taunt the police, write to the press, and vanish so completely that, more than a century later, his identity has never been confirmed. Who was capable of this? And why, with thousands of officers and one of the largest manhunts of the Victorian era, could nobody catch him? To understand why this case became so difficult to solve, it helps to understand where it happened and to whom. In 1888, Whitechapel sat in the East End of London, a separate world from the wealth of the City of London just to its west. The City of London was, and still is, a small, separately governed historic district with its own police force, distinct from the Metropolitan Police, known as Scotland Yard, which covered Whitechapel and the rest of the metropolis. That split in authority would matter a great deal before this story is over. Whitechapel itself was one of the poorest districts in the British Empire, a tangle of narrow courts and common lodging houses where thousands of people lived one bad week away from sleeping on the street. Many women in the area survived day to day, needing to earn just enough money before nightfall to pay for a bed. This was the world Mary Ann Nichols belonged to. She had not always lived this way. Nichols, 42 or 43 years old, was the daughter of a locksmith. By 1888, she was on her own, surviving in the common lodging houses of the East End, much like the women whose names would soon be linked to hers in the public imagination. Over the next 10 weeks, 4 more women would die within the same few streets, and they would eventually be grouped together by history as the canonical 5. Each had her own story. Annie Chapman, 47, had also been separated from her husband for years and was struggling with chronic illness and alcoholism, surviving by selling crochet work and flowers. Elizabeth Stride, 44, had been born in Sweden and married a ship's carpenter. She earned a little money cleaning rooms and sewing, and told people a story that her husband and children died in a shipwreck. Catherine Eddowes, 46, survived by taking trips to the countryside to pick hops and hawking goods on the street. And Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest of the 5 at around 25, had been born in Limerick, Ireland, and lived with a fish porter named Joseph Barnett in a small rented room. Investigators would later note that, despite their different backgrounds, these women shared a grim set of characteristics. Most were in their 40s, all were desperately poor, and all were killed within the same small stretch of London's East End. This is the human reality the case rested on. Before Jack the Ripper became one of the most recognized names in criminal history, before the letters and the headlines and the century of theories, 5 women were trying to survive in one of the hardest corners of Victorian London. By the time Mary Ann Nichols died in Bucks Row, Whitechapel had already seen warning signs that something was wrong. On the 3rd of April, 1888, a woman named Emma Elizabeth Smith was attacked in the district. She died several days later of peritonitis, a complication of her injuries. Her case opens the official Whitechapel Murders police file, though most researchers do not connect her directly to the canonical five. Other women, including Annie Millwood and Ada Wilson, also reported attacks in the area that same year, though their cases too remain only loosely tied to what followed. Then, on the 7th of August, a woman named Martha Tabram was found stabbed 39 times in George Yard. Then came Mary Ann Nichols on the 31st of August. The scene investigators walked into was sparse but disturbing. Nothing had been stolen. Whatever drove this killing, robbery did not appear to be the motive. 8 days later, on the 8th of September, a second woman was found in the backyard of a lodging house at 29 Hanbury Street. It was Annie Chapman. Her murder followed the same brutal pattern as the first. Her throat cut, her body mutilated. For the first time, investigators began to suspect they were not looking at two unrelated killings, but at one person returning to the same district, using the same method. It was at this point that the case stopped being a local tragedy and became a national obsession. Two police forces shared responsibility for what followed: the Metropolitan Police and the separate City of London Police. Leading the investigation on the ground for Scotland Yard was Inspector Frederick Aberline, an experienced detective placed in direct charge of the officers working the case. Above him, Chief Inspector Donald Swanson was tasked with organizing and assessing the flood of information generated by the murders. At the same time, Sir Charles Warren served as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and Sir Robert Anderson headed the Criminal Investigation Department. The scale of the response was enormous for its time. Officers distributed roughly 80,000 leaflets across the district. Investigators eventually interviewed upwards of 2,000 people, formally looked into around 300 of them, and detained roughly 80 for further questioning. None of it produced an arrest. In late September, a letter arrived at a London press agency, written in red ink, taunting the police, and signed with a name the writer claimed for himself: Jack the Ripper. Whether this letter, remembered today as the Dear Boss letter, was genuinely written by the killer or invented by a journalist hoping to sell newspapers has never been settled. What is certain is that it gave the case and the unidentified man behind it the name history would remember. Then came the night that defined the case more than any other. In the early hours of the 30th of September, 1888, Elizabeth Stride was attacked in Dutfield's Yard, a dark courtyard off Berner Street beside a working men's club. Roughly 15 minutes before her body was found, a man named Israel Schwartz reported witnessing someone throw a woman to the ground nearby and shout a word, Lipski, used at the time in the area as an ethnic slur. Schwartz's account remains one of the most important eyewitness statements in the entire case, though he never testified at the inquest. Stride's body, found at 1 o'clock in the morning, showed the killer's signature throat wound, but unlike the previous victims, she had not been mutilated. Investigators believe the killer was interrupted. A local merchant named Louis Diemschutz arrived at the yard with his pony and cart at almost the exact moment of the attack, very likely forcing the killer to flee before he could continue. At 1:30 that same morning, a City of London police constable named Edward Watkins walked his beat through Mitre Square and saw nothing unusual. Returning at 16 minutes to 2, a gap of only 14 minutes, he found the body of a woman who would soon be identified as Catherine Eddowes. Of all 5 women, Eddowes is among the most fully documented as a person, and it is worth pausing on who she actually was. She lived in a common lodging house on Flower and Dean Street with her partner, John Kelly, and survived, like so many of her neighbors, by hawking cheap goods and taking on domestic cleaning. According to the deputy who ran her lodging house, Eddowes was a very jolly woman, always singing, and was not, by his account, often drunk. On the evening of the 29th of September, Eddowes was arrested for public drunkenness and held in a cell at Bishopsgate Police Station. She slept it off and was judged sober enough to be released at 1 o'clock in the morning on the 30th. As she left, she was last seen turning toward Houndsditch, in the direction of Mitre Square. Less than 45 minutes later, she was dead. A witness named Joseph Lowende reported seeing a man talking with a woman believed to be Eddowes near Mitre Square at around 1:35 that morning, only minutes before Constable Watkins found her body. Senior officials, including Robert Anderson, would later claim that a Jewish witness, widely believed to be either Lowende or Schwartz, had privately and definitively identified the killer, but refused to testify publicly. No formal identification was ever entered into the official record. Shortly after Eddowes' body was found, a piece of her blood-stained apron turned up on Goulston Street, beneath a message scrawled in chalk on a wall. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The graffito appeared to sit directly on the killer's escape route from Mitre Square, and it should have stood as one of the most important pieces of physical evidence in the entire case. Instead, fearing the message, and the rumor already spreading that the killer was a Jewish immigrant would spark violence against the area's Jewish community, Commissioner Warren personally ordered it erased before it could be properly photographed. Whatever handwriting evidence it might have offered was lost permanently. It remains one of the most debated decisions in the entire investigation, a choice that may have prevented a riot and may also have destroyed the case's best physical link to the killer's own hand. The double killing also exposed a structural weakness in the investigation. Eddowes had been murdered just inside City of London jurisdiction, while Stride and the graffito fell under the Metropolitan Police. The two forces did not always share information smoothly, and friction between them shaped how evidence was handled in the days that followed. On the 16th of October, a man named George Lusk, chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, received a parcel containing half of a human kidney, along with a crudely written letter claiming the sender had eaten the other half. It is remembered today as the "From Hell" letter. Whether the kidney genuinely came from Catherine Eddowes has never been conclusively proven. For nearly 6 weeks after the double killing, the city held its breath. Then, on the morning of the 9th of November, the killer struck for what is recognized as the last time among the canonical five. Mary Jane Kelly lived with Joseph Barnett in a small, sparsely furnished room barely 12 feet across, at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street. Unlike every previous victim, she was killed indoors, in private, with no risk that a passing constable or an arriving cart driver might interrupt the attack. The mutilation of her body was, by every account in the case file, the most extensive of the five, consistent with a killer who, this time, had been given uncomfortable amounts of time and privacy to work without fear of discovery. A man named George Hutchinson came forward afterward, claiming he had closely observed the man Kelly brought into a room that night, and he gave an unusually detailed physical description for conditions that, by every other account, were extremely dark. Some modern researchers suspect Hutchinson exaggerated his account, possibly seeking attention from the press. Across all 5 canonical murders, investigators and modern researchers have identified a consistent pattern. The killer struck in the early hours of the morning, in locations that were secluded, but not difficult to reach. He attacked his victims while they were lying down, cutting their throats, generally left to right, quickly enough that the women had little or no chance to scream or fight back. Blood pooled near the neck rather than splattering outward, consistent with a victim who was already incapacitated before the worst of the violence began. In most cases, he then mutilated the abdomen, and in 2 of those cases, he removed specific internal organs, a uterus, a kidney, and took them from the scene. He also did not strike at a steady pace. The gaps between murders varied widely, about a week between the first and second, roughly 3 weeks between the second and the double event, and nearly 6 weeks before the final and most extensive killing. 2 physicians, Dr. Thomas Bond and Dr. George Bagster Phillips, conducted the post-mortem examinations that ultimately convinced investigators all 5 deaths were the work of one person. Their findings also addressed a question the public was desperate to answer. Did this killer have surgical training? Bond's own conclusion was that he did not, that the wounds reflected determination and a degree of comfort with a knife, but not the precision of a trained anatomist. No one was ever charged, tried, or convicted for any of the 5 canonical murders. The only legal proceedings the case produced were coroner's inquests, held to establish each woman's cause of death formally. That fact alone makes the next part of this story different from most criminal cases. There is no verified offender to describe here, only a profile. Dr. Thomas Bond produced what is widely regarded as the first criminal offender profile in British policing history. Based on the wounds and the pattern of the attacks, he concluded the killer was physically strong, cool, daring, and solitary. He believed the man led an eccentric, isolated existence, was likely middle-aged, and, this is the detail that unsettled investigators most, would appear to anyone who met him as a quiet, inoffensively looking man, probably neatly and respectably dressed, without a regular occupation, but with a small income. Bond theorized this outward calm hid what he described as periodic attacks of homicidal and erotic mania. By Bond's own reasoning, the killer might have looked entirely unremarkable to the people who lived around him. This is a conclusion drawn from the pattern of evidence, not a diagnosis of any specific named individual, because no individual was ever confirmed as the offender. Several men were investigated closely enough and discussed seriously enough by senior police that they remain the leading historical suspects today. Fairness to each of them matters because not one was ever convicted of anything connected to these murders. Aaron Kosminski was a Polish Jewish immigrant working as a hairdresser in the area. He had a documented history of mental illness, had spent time in workhouses, and was committed to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum in February of 1891. He was a favored suspect of Chief Inspector Swanson and Sir Robert Anderson, both of whom believed, based on private claims never tested in open court, that a witness had identified him. Montague John Druitt was an English barrister and assistant schoolmaster who took his own life in the Thames in late December of 1888, just weeks after the final canonical murder. He became a leading suspect, largely on the strength of a private memo written years later by Chief Constable Melville Macnaughton, who was convinced Druitt was a strong candidate. That memo, however, contains a factual error. It incorrectly describes Druitt as a doctor, when he was in fact a teacher and barrister, and no direct physical or testimonial evidence has ever placed him in Whitechapel on any of the relevant nights. Other names populated the police files. Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born con man and thief, was also named as a suspect. So was Severin Klasowski, a serial killer in his own right, with a criminal history that made him a credible candidate to later researchers, even though no direct evidence ties him to the 1888 killings specifically. None of these men were ever charged. None were ever convicted. The honest answer, supported by every surviving court record and police file, is that the identity of the man responsible for these 5 deaths was never established. For more than a century, the mystery has inspired both serious research and endless speculation. In 2019, a DNA study claimed that genetic material from a shawl allegedly found near Catherine Eddowes' body matched Aaron Kosminski's family line, leading many headlines to declare the case solved. It wasn't. Critics questioned the shawl's authenticity, possible contamination, and the lack of independently verified data. Today, the study remains disputed, not conclusive. Among historians, 2 suspects dominate discussion. Aaron Kosminski was favored by senior investigators, but asylum records describe him as passive and non-violent, conflicting with the killer's brutality. Montague John Druitt was named by Chief Constable Macnaughton, and his suicide shortly after the final murder has fueled suspicion, but no evidence places him in Whitechapel during the killings. Both remain plausible, but unproven. More sensational theories have fared far worse. The famous royal conspiracy proposed by Stephen Knight accused Prince Albert Victor or Sir William Gull, but historical records contradict its claims, and even Knight later admitted key parts were fabricated. Today, historians regard it as debunked speculation rather than credible evidence. Today, the Whitechapel murders remain officially unsolved. Researchers continue debating the suspects, evidence, and surviving police files, and likely will for years to come. The investigation remained open through the 1891 murder of Frances Coles, leading to ongoing debate over whether she, or Martha Tabram, should be counted among the canonical victims. Several questions also remain unanswered. Did the killer have genuine anatomical knowledge, or was he simply experienced with a knife? Were the infamous Dear Boss, Saucy Jackie, or From Hell letters authentic, or elaborate hoaxes? And sealed special branch files from the period remain inaccessible, leaving their relevance unknown. What we do know is that 5 women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were murdered in London's East End between August and November 1888, almost certainly by the same killer. The investigation was one of the largest of its time, but was hindered by hoax letters, police rivalry, and the erasure of the Goulston Street graffito. What history still cannot answer is the one question that matters most: who Jack the Ripper really was.